It's the agenda here on the Blood Red channel. I'm Guy Clarke. Alongside me, Matt Addison and Ed Kay, as we discuss Liverpool's foray into the Portuguese market. Of course, Luis Diaz signed in January, Darwin Nunez in this summer window, and the latest links are linking Liverpool with a move back for another Porto player in Otavio. Matt, I'll throw over to you first. This is a player who I remember last summer we spoke about was being linked with a move to Liverpool. Or what is the story coming out of Portugal regarding this one?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think it's a player that you can kind of see why Liverpool might be interested. I'd certainly put it like that. He's exactly the kind of player that I like watching. I've certainly enjoyed watching a few bits on YouTube since he's been linked with Liverpool again. He's very much a player that is almost a little bit kind of Fabio Carvalho-like in a sense that he's pretty much a number 10, can play wide as well, but is very hardworking, very much a player who wins the ball back high up the field, which I can see that Liverpool might be interested in. And the suggestion really that the latest rumours, and that is all they are at this moment in time, is that Leeds United are very much interested in him. Sort of talk of about 27 million pound bid being put in, which has been rejected apparently from Porto for him. And Porto seeming to believe that there's a possibility Liverpool might be interested in him as well, and potentially similar to the Luis Diaz deal, obviously in January. Tottenham, West Ham, one or two others came in for Luis Diaz, and Liverpool kind of, their hand was forced. If they wanted him, they had to go in and get him. That seems to be the suggestion here as well, that obviously Leeds interested. I would imagine there's probably one or two other teams as well across Europe and maybe further that possibly could be interested as well if Liverpool do want him. The suggestion seems to be that they might have to go and do it now. But he's an interesting player. Like I say, he's someone that I like, but he's been linked with Liverpool last season. Obviously didn't go for him then. Being linked again, is it just the kind of easy sort of Liverpool tend to buy Portuguese players at this moment in time? Is it that kind of easy link? Is there something more to it? Time will tell, but certainly an interesting player, and that's kind of where the story is at this point.
What's your take on it, Ed? I mean, there's been a lot of talk, hasn't there, over the last week or so? Our understanding at the Echo being that Liverpool's summer transfer business is all but complete, and I imagine it would only take something very drastic to change in the market for Liverpool to make a move. But do you think there is a need for a creative midfield player, albeit Fabio Carvalho is coming in? It feels maybe a more senior option in a player, maybe like Otavio, would be quite a good fit.
Yeah, I think we've not really had that sort of creative attacking midfield influence. Certainly since Wijnaldum left, we've struggled a bit more in that capacity, and definitely since Coutinho left, we never really got in another player of that sort of ilk, really. So I can see why they would be interested in it. How well he fit into the team, I can't say. I can't say I watched a massive amount of him. Like Matt says, I've seen the odd clip, and he looks a good player. Like you say, wins the ball high up, and that is our main MO. So you can see how he might fit in. But I remember there being links last summer, and they were maybe a bit stronger than they are now. And then nothing seemed to really come of it. And then all of a sudden we signed Luis Diaz out of nowhere. Now, obviously, we signed Nunez as well from the same league. So I think it is hard to see us. It's hard to imagine us going in and buying another attacker from the Portuguese league in such a short space of time. But, you know, stranger things have happened. And the fact that it's a Leeds bid and now Porto are the ones seeming to think that maybe we're going to come in for it does make me think maybe there is something in it, because obviously Leeds will be dead serious about getting him in, because they'll be wanting to replace Rafinha because he might be going to Arsenal, and so it's whether do we really want him, because with Diaz it seemed like as soon as Tottenham went in, you didn't hear about Liverpool might be going in. You heard Liverpool had sort of hijacked the deal, and that was the first you heard about it. So if Liverpool did really want him, would we be hearing about it this way? Would we be hearing about it when they were actually linked with him? I'm not sure, but personally, I'm not sure I can see it happening in this window, definitely.
Yeah, I say there, Matt, we understand that the summer business is done, but I suppose as we saw in January with the Luis Diaz deal, if opportunity presents and Liverpool feel they have to press the button to go in this market, then I'm sure they certainly will. And as you say, Porto may be thinking that lightning will strike twice. It does seem as though Ed's saying a bit as though that isn't going to happen this time round. But Jurgen Klopp, I remember speaking ahead of taking on Porto in the Champions League last season, so full of praise for not just Porto, but the Portuguese league and kind of the pedestal it puts players on ready to move on into top 5 European leagues and top sides within that as well.
Yeah, I think it's certainly a place that Liverpool have looked at recently. Obviously, Nunez and Diaz are two of those that they've kind of determined were able to make that leap across. Obviously, time will tell with Nunez, but the early signs with Luis Diaz are that he is absolutely ready for it. I think it's a much more physical league and a much more intense league than maybe a lot of people might give it credit for. I think it's a pretty good grounding in terms of coming into the Premier League in that sense. And obviously, if it's one of the top 2 or 3 clubs, they tend to be in the Champions League or certainly in the Europa League each year. So they've got that experience as well. So it certainly ticks a lot of boxes, really, for Liverpool. I think Otavio is one of those that is kind of a technical and gifted creative player, but he's also got that kind of steel about him. He's not one of those that, even though he's not the biggest physically, he's not going to be knocked off the ball. So again, you can kind of see how that would make sense moving across to England. And I think it would be, an interesting next step for him, whether it is just a case of putting 2 and 2 together and Porto supposedly anticipating a bid. They apparently want 38 million. His release clause is about 51 million pounds. It's fairly substantial figures that are being talked about. But I think if the sort of pieces fell in the right way for Liverpool this summer, let's say they get a bid that was sort of deemed worthy for Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, for example, could you see a possibility where something happened in that regard? I think obviously he's a slightly more attacking player, Otavio, but I could certainly see him playing in midfield as well. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Bernardo Silva in some ways, in that you could kind of play him in probably 4 or 5 different positions across midfield and attack. But yeah, whether Liverpool firm up any supposed interest, we'll have to wait and see. But there is certainly a precedence there for Liverpool moving into Portuguese markets. And I know we're going to talk about Julian Ward very, very shortly, but I think he's a big reason as to why that is.
Yeah, most definitely. Ed, in terms of the Portuguese league and the stylistic matchup to the Premier League and how certainly the players, I say the players, Luis Diaz in particular, how well he's acclimatised to the Premier League. But you look at Wolves, the amount of Portuguese players they've signed, Manchester City, the likes of Ruben Diaz, Bruno Fernandes at Manchester United. It does feel as though there is a very good stylistic match between the Portuguese League and the Premier League. And I wonder whether that's the fact that Premier League football maybe has almost gone more European as opposed to the Portuguese league. Matt saying it's a physical league, but maybe not quite this kind of blood and thunder league that we've always thought the Premier League is.
Yeah, I think maybe, like I say, I don't watch too much of the Portuguese league, but like Matt says, it does seem to have a bit of that physicality to it, and maybe it sort of marries the European style with the English style, and we've sort of gravitated more towards that. And maybe that is why, over the last sort of five seasons or so, we have seen a lot of good talent coming to the Premier League from that Portuguese league and doing well. Bruno Fernandes, like you say, while he might have been pretty poor last 18 months or so, when he first came, a lot like Luis Diaz, really sort of set the world alight. Luis Diaz, since he came, I'm sort of waiting to see if he might suffer from a bit of second season syndrome, because you couldn't really believe just how well he'd fit in with the, like I say, with the style. It was like, it just wasn't a problem for him to adjust at all. Whereas you used to seeing a lot of players in this Klopp team, like a Robertson or whoever, who couldn't unseat Alberto Moreno at left back for 8 months or so. You used to seeing people sort of having to acclimatise. But like you said, Diaz, it seemed to take him no time at all. Hopefully it'll be the same with Nunez. And it just looks like that Portuguese league is becoming maybe a bit stronger. It's certainly easily one of the stronger leagues outside of that top 5, and you can see why people in the Premier League keep going and poaching all the best players from the best clubs, because they're coming over and they're doing a good job in the Premier League.
Yeah, to me, it must be on the verge of ousting Ligue 1, the French league, for being that 5th strongest division. And that so often was a talent spotting pool for Premier League clubs, was the French division. But it does feel as though it is so rich, the Portuguese league, in talent for them to be plucked and taken to the Premier League. And you mentioned before Julian Ward. I mean, we've had an explainer go out on the Blood Red channel about Julian Ward and his links to Portugal. And it feels as though this could, I suppose, be the start of something under Julian Ward with the signing of Diaz and Darwin Nunez, even Fabio Carvalho, Portuguese heritage, of course, given his links previously in his career actually working for the Portuguese FA, as well as being kind of head of scouting in that area for Manchester City.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating, and it's slightly fortunate, isn't it, really, that it matches up with the perfect league to go and get these players. Is exactly where his expertise is. Like you say, he arrived at Liverpool from Manchester City in 2012 to obviously work in recruitment and scouting and that side of things. And his job has changed a couple of times in that period, but has always been, someone really highly thought of at Liverpool. Obviously, the fact that he took over from Michael Edwards is all you need to know in terms of what people within FSG and the club think of him. But I suppose his job really since he's come to Liverpool has not just been in terms of identifying talent, but in terms of identifying clubs where that talent can develop. So he worked as, I think, loans development and pathways manager, which essentially means picking the clubs where young players or whichever players really could go out on loan. So identifying a good environment to send a player. And I know he sort of spoke to Liverpool's website a couple of years ago and explained that he kind of had to identify certain clubs where it was the best place for these young players to develop. So when he sent Harry Wilson, for example, to Hull City, was that the right team, the right sort of style of play? We've seen that so many times. I think he would have been heavily involved in the decision, for example, to send Harvey Elliott to Blackburn Rovers, which turned out to be a brilliant decision. It was the sort of right level for him, but also the right style of play. And I think when you're kind of looking at these sort of opportunities, really, obviously married up, as you say, with the fact that he speaks Portuguese, worked with the Portuguese national team, you can kind of get a feel for which clubs around Europe are the ones where the talent can develop best. And obviously it works the same way as if Liverpool are sending a player out on loan to a certain club, they know that that club is a good environment, but obviously they also therefore know that that club is a good place to pick up other players if they deem, for example, Porto to be a good place to send a player. Well, by definition, that also means that Porto is a good place for the Porto players to have developed and therefore would come on to Liverpool's radar. So, yeah, it's a perfect match, really, in terms of the kind of network, the sort of, I suppose, contacts and relationships that he's been able to pick up with these clubs, obviously in Porto and Sporting and Benfica, but elsewhere across the continent as well. And whenever Liverpool have sent players out, obviously Marko Grujic has been at Porto on loan. There's other examples as well. I mean, he's not just speaking to the player, he's speaking to people within those clubs. He's got that kind of direct link really with everybody that he needs to know within that club who can give him the opportunity to come back in and get talent in the future. So yeah, there's so many links really with him and Portugal, him and other areas as well. But it just seems to have worked perfectly, really, that all of the relationships that he's had in 2 or 3 previous job roles have kind of pointed him towards the perfect direction for future transfers. So in terms of the future, I think Darwin Nunez and Luis Diaz are just the start, really. I would imagine that Portugal is a place that Liverpool are going to be going shopping in plenty of times in the future because there's just so many links there. It just makes sense, really, to make the most of those.
Yeah, Ed, I mean, we're not kind of, I suppose, looking to rewrite history. Not every signing from the Portuguese league has been great for Liverpool. Think of Thiago Ilori, Rafael Camacho, famously Lazar Markovic. They've not all worked, but the thing of during, I suppose, this scouting and recruitment era that Liverpool are in is how they so consistently end up being a step ahead. I mean, when it came out in the autumn that Michael Edwards was to be leaving in the summer, a lot of people were thinking, crikey, how are Liverpool going to continue to find these transfer gems and really polish them up and build the next team under Jurgen Klopp, even if Jurgen Klopp was going to stay? Forward comes the January transfer window, less than 2 months after Michael Edwards says he's leaving, and in Julian Ward brings Luis Diaz a piece of business forward from the summer. And on top of that, now has brought in Darwin Nunez, who, of course, we haven't seen yet, but having watched him in the Champions League, looks as though it's another shrewd piece of business.
Yeah, well, he's certainly got off to a bit of a flyer, hasn't he, in taking over from Edwards, and I think that's quite important because I think if we hadn't been pushed to do that Diaz deal so early and we had waited until the summer, we probably wouldn't have done any business in January, and we'd have got to sort of June before we were like, all right, what's this guy about then? Is he going to be as much of a recruitment genius as Edwards has been for us, But as it was, the deal got pushed forward because Spurs wanted him as well. We've got him in January, and now we've watched him play for however many months, realised, Julian Ward might know what he's doing then. Because, I mean, like I say, I've already said today, but what an impact Luis Diaz had, how well he fit in straight away. He's almost the perfect signing. But like you say, it remains to be seen with Nunez, and I am nervous. I am nervous for that because it's a big signing, and if that doesn't go right, maybe the gloss of what a deal Diaz has been, maybe that gets taken off a bit. So I'm anxious for Nunez to do well, and if he does, and hopefully he will, then I think you can pretty much say with a degree of certainty that Julian Ward's probably the right man to take over from Edwards. I'm not entirely sure FSG would have been letting Edwards go if they weren't so confident Julian Ward would do a good enough job, because they've tied down Jurgen Klopp till 2026, so they're going to want to be keeping the wheels turning at least until then. And like I say, we'll see what happens with any future signings. We'll see what happens with Nunez at the start of this new season, but hopefully he is the right man for the job.
Yeah, let's wait and see on that point. Right, final one to get into, Matt, is you mentioned before it could be a fruitful league for Liverpool to go shopping in future. If you had to make a list, who's on your shopping list in the Premier Liga right now?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few, to be fair, and it's obviously not just players as well. I've got to mention that Pep Lijnders and Vitor Matos both came from Porto as well, two huge sort of parts of the backroom staff. So again, that's something potentially that Liverpool could look at replicating in the future as well. But I suppose there's a number of names really. Liverpool have bought, and other teams, obviously Fabio Vieira now going to Arsenal as well. They've kind of taken all of Porto's best players. It might be a year or two before the next one sort of leaves there for big money. But I think Evan Nielsen is one that you'd probably look at. I think he's only just turned 22. Maybe in a couple of years' time, might be one that the bigger clubs are taking a bit of a look at. And Benfica, Rafa Silva, I know there was a story, I think Simon Hughes reported that Liverpool were kind of looking at him throughout this season. I think he's 29 now, so the ship's probably just about sailed on him. But again, he was one that kind of fitted into the Liverpool style and ticked a lot of boxes, really similar to Mohamed Salah by all accounts in terms of the way that he plays. And obviously that relationship with Darwin Nunez was really, really good for them last season. So he is one that possibly is probably beyond Liverpool now just because of his age. But again, just proves that point really, that there's still a lot of opportunities to go and look in this league. And probably Sporting Lisbon are the one that you'd look at with the biggest list. I think Pedro Gonçalves has been linked with Liverpool for 2 or 3 seasons now. Obviously, the tag being the next Bruno Fernandes. I think they are sort of similar in as much as they're creative midfielders that score goals. I think there's probably a little bit more of a Liverpool style fit really with Gonçalves compared to obviously Fernandes. It's difficult to assess any player, isn't it, at Manchester United in terms of the mess that they are tactically, but I think certainly he would kind of fit in at Liverpool a little bit better. And Matheus Nunes and João Palhinha are 2 more names that I think are certainly this season and beyond as well going to be sort of spoken about a lot more really within European football. I know Pep Guardiola can be kind of quite flippant with his comments and does kind of exaggerate certain things at certain times. But I think Matheus Nunes, after they played in the group stage last season, he said he was one of the best midfielders in the world. And certainly there is, a great deal of talent there. And João Palhinha as well, I think being linked with Wolves, 1 or 2 others at the moment, sort of talk of 45, 50 million pounds for him. So yeah, plenty of talent at Sporting, obviously. Porto and Benfica, Liverpool have taken their best players already. It's probably Sporting's turn next, and whether that's this summer, January or beyond, I think there's certainly a good few names still to be looked at. But yeah, for Liverpool, probably they're shopping for the time being. Otavio aside, probably if that is to become true. I think the other names probably 2 or 3 years down the line they might be of interest to Liverpool. But in the meantime, I'm sure plenty of other Premier League teams will be taking a look.
Yeah, it's definitely a market to keep an eye on, and I'm sure a number of Liverpool fans are beginning to keep a very, very close eye on the Portuguese league week in, week out, and getting used to some of those stars turning out for the likes of Sporting, Porto, and Benfica. But from myself, Guy Clarke, Matt Addison, and Ed Kay, thanks for joining us on this edition of The Agenda on the Blood Red channel. It's bye for now.